All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly broadcast. As I say every week, if you're brand new to these things, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Today we've got another wonderful interview with the great trombonist and educator and composer and friend, Julian Priester. Julian, thank you for joining us here today. So, and I know this was, we were kind of, it might be up in the air because you had your second vaccination for COVID yesterday. Okay, and everything's going well so far. Good. Well, pleasure again to have you here with us. Our last two interviews, we kind of covered a lot of ground, and I was trying to think, well, where should we go today? And again, it's going to jump all over the place. For viewers watching, if you have any questions for Julian, please feel free to let us know. We're going to open up the last 15 minutes as usual. So if you want to ask anything to Julian about any of his wisdom and knowledge to impart, please do so. So what I was thinking about to talk about today with you is you spent so many years with so many wonderful artists, all different kinds of artists. So I wanted to talk to you. I can't remember in one of the past interviews if we discussed Freddie Hubbard at all, but I know you made an album or two with him. Okay, all right. And can you talk about that experience working with Freddie? Because, we both have a mutual friend in Hadley Calaman, from Cornish, and Hadley mentioned many stories to me over the years about his time with Freddie Hubbard. But I'm curious, what was your experience working with Freddie Hubbard?
Freddie and I were close friends. We were actually roommates at one point when I first moved to New York. He and I and Lionel Hampton shared a closet. Anyway, I admire Freddie. I was always admired his stamina, his tradition. I mean, I should say his adherence to the tradition of the music that we all love. Freddie being from Indianapolis, which is close to my home, to Chicago, and I think the folks from the musicians, I should say, the artists that are still from that Midwestern section of the country, they have a little different slant, the feel of the music was a sort of Midwestern flavor.
Hang on just one second.
Okay.
Go ahead and talk, Julian.
Okay. As I was saying, that the music came from, that came from Chicago, Indianapolis, and other Midwestern areas, St. Louis, other places right there. It was really influenced by Southerners, when the Great Migration, when the African Americans moved from the South to the North to find work.
Hang on one second, Julian. For those of you, there's some members watching that are saying there's some issues with the sound. I'm hoping everyone can hear Julian better now. If you can't, please let us know because I want to make sure you can all hear what he's saying. So sorry to interrupt, Julian. Please go on.
No problem. So what I was trying to point out was that for those who study the music can hear the difference in style and character from comparing the musicians from the Midwest to the musicians from the West Coast and the musicians from the East Coast. Although I was one who sort of really admired the East Coast musicians and tried to emulate that, what's the word for it, that character.
Yes.
The Dizzy Gillespie's and the Charlie Parkers and the J.J. Johnsons and the Miles Davises, and it goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
New York City was sort of the capital of the music because the venues were there, the record companies were there, and the media was there, the critics, and so if you wanted to become noticed, New York was the place to be.
Yes. Hang on one second. I didn't turn it on. Oh. Okay, this should be working now. I'm sorry, everybody. always running on fumes and fixing things left and right.
Yeah.
So hopefully you should be able to turn to hear Julian better now. Is that?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello.
Let us know. We apologize for the technical difficulties here. So you were saying that you preferred more of the style and the performers playing of the East Coast.
East Coast, the style, character. That's where Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Clifford Brown, Sonny Rollins. Those were my heroes, and those were the people who I tried to emulate. Although I was from Chicago, from the Midwest. But even then, there was still a certain flavor that Midwesterners projected in their music.
And for those with the microphone having issues earlier here, which is operator error on my part, I apologize. What we're discussing is Julian's relationship with Freddie Hubbard, and if you missed, probably you weren't able to hear it earlier, he was saying that he shared a very small apartment with Freddie Hubbard and Slide Hampton. What time frame was this in New York?
This was in the late 1950s, early 60s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to bring people up to speed, we basically were talking about his relationship with Freddie Hubbard and what he admired about Freddie Hubbard, and it's the energy of his playing, and from the more talking about Midwestern. He was from the Midwest. You were kind of from the Midwest as well, and you enjoyed that.
Right.
It seems too, that there are many wonderful musicians on the East Coast. There were many wonderful musicians on the West Coast, but it's a different. And this is totally my opinion here, but please weigh in. It's like a different energy. It's a different energy and feeling when you hear that playing. There is different energy. And intensity more from the East Coast.
Yes.
And that's not any way, shape, or form a knock against West Coast, but it's a different intensity, a different level of energy.
Right. There was a sort of a movement in the change over from the East Coast bebop style music to the West Coast cool style, which became very popular. It sort of came after the end of the war, During the war itself, the record companies were sort of laying low because they couldn't get a hold of the vinyl to make records because the war effort was using up that particular material. So when the war was over, a lot of things had changed. What was popular before the war and during the war, the bebop that is, I'm talking about after the war, had another hero. And those heroes lived on the West Coast. I'm talking about Jerry Mulligan. I'm talking about Lee Konitz. I'm talking about, I'm losing track of names because being a Midwesterner and being in love with the East Coast, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to West Coast musicians. Some of them stood out, above and I could not ignore. But I'm talking about people like Stan Getz. You couldn't ignore them. And also there was a lot of other wonderful performers, artists, artistically. And so I have to give them kudos, But my heart still lie on the East Coast. And for that obvious reasons, you couldn't find a Kenny Dorham, for instance, on the West Coast. And
I wonder if part of that, talking with friends that live over there and grew up over there, I wonder if part of that energy and intensity of playing is because the pace of life is faster, from what I understand from people that live there. Like everything is much faster. There's more intensity, and so that maybe that comes out in the music. I don't know. I mean, you would know, so I'm asking you.
Yes, I believe you're correct. The East Coast, New York in particular, due to the fact that there's so many people there. That's not to say there's not a lot of people in Los Angeles, but in New York, the people were more compact. I mean, you walk down the street and there's maybe 20 people walking with you. Whereas on the West Coast, everything is spread out, and you can be relaxed. And I think that music reflected that particular environment. as exemplified in the music that came out of there.
I want to go back to your relationship with Freddie Hubbard because people say that he's one of the trumpet greats, and arguably he is.
Yes,
you
he
know?
is. Yes, he is.
His conception, his way of composing music, his way of playing.
Yes.
I'm curious, as someone who lived with him, a lot of times you see the output, the albums and things like that, but you don't really know, like, how did they get from point A to point B? And obviously a lot of work and a lot of study and
Right.
trials and tribulations.
Right.
But was he an avid? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to your comment there. Freddie was a disciple of Clifford Brown. Okay, and as such, he deserved my compliments and my respect because Clifford Brown was one of my teachers. I listened to all of his music. I tried to emulate him, although I was playing a different instrument. But you could do no wrong in my eyesight if you if you were close to the Clifford Brown style. Freddie wasn't the only one. Woody Shaw was also in that particular school. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong.
Well, I think part of that, like along the same lines of that, for me, would be like as a saxophonist, someone like Sonny Stitt or like Charlie Parker. Everything is very, very clean.
Yes.
Very precise. There is no, there's no question about what the notes are. You can hear all the time, precisely with precision, all the notes. Everything is crystal clear, and you can hear that. And that would make sense with Freddie Hubbard being a logical extension of Clifford Brown, because Clifford Brown, you listen to any of those recordings and you have that.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm curious then, I've read a couple different books about Clifford Brown, and I know that he was an avid practicer. He had a daily routine that he spent a certain amount of time practicing, and, and still died very young. Was
Right.
Freddie, I assume the answer is yes, because his technique was so ridiculously wonderful.
Yes.
Was he an avid practicer?
Oh yes, and his whole character, his stature. He was, how can I put it? His personality was present in his music. He was aggressive, and he approached music that way. You can hear it. You can hear it in his playing. He controlled the instrument. He controlled the trumpet. He made the trumpet obey, if I can use that analogy.
Yes. Well, again, I said we're going to jump around quite a bit. And if anyone else has questions, please let us know now, and we'll get to them towards the end of the segment. But I wanted to ask you about, Freddie Hubbard, like yourself, your careers span many decades of music and changes in music. And I remember when I was studying with you back at Cornish, I was asking you about where you thought the future of jazz was going, and we were discussing hip-hop, and you were kind of weighing in on jazz and hip-hop, and can you give your thoughts and opinions about that? Because when we had this discussion, at this point, this was 20 years ago.
Right.
And so now I'm curious where you stand on your thoughts about music, in particular, jazz and hip-hop,
Yes.
or anything else that you want to speak on, please.
Well, I am really intent on revealing an aspect of jazz that has not received its proper attention. The soloist is not given enough attention, is not given any credit. When you examine what the soloist is doing, he's composing spontaneously. I call it spontaneous composition.
Yes.
All right? That concept is not advertised. It's not given any attention at all. And you certainly don't get paid anything special for doing that, for creating that on that level. You are a side person. Yes. And all the attention is given to the leader. And the leader deserves attention for organizing the group. So it should not end there, because the group composes of every entity in that group. The sound of the group comes from the effort of every person in the group. So I think that more attention should be given to the spontaneous composers.
You and I know this. I think most musicians that study this music know this. I think the general public at large, if you talk about Miles Davis and say, look, for example, his very famous album, best-selling album, Kind of Blue. Everyone knows Miles Davis and Kind of Blue, but what would those records be without John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley and Jimmy
Right,
Cobb and Bill
right.
Evans, you know.
Yes.
Paul Chambers.
Yes.
But as musicians, we all know those individual voices and sounds on those instruments. But the general public, it just stops with Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. They might even not even know the names of the compositions. You know,
Right.
maybe they do. But
Maybe they do, yeah.
also another one of those best-selling albums, Dave Brubeck, Time Out. You know, and you can divide a room with that. People either love it or hate it. But everyone always credits Take 5 with Dave Brubeck,
Dave
even though
Brubeck,
Paul
yeah.
Desmond wrote the song and got the
Yeah.
royalties for it. you
And
know.
the concept actually came from the Dave Brubeck Quartet hearing. It was at the Jazz Festival in Michigan, Ann Arbor, I think, the Jazz Festival, when Max Roach was performing there. And we performed a piece called As Long as You're Living. And I think that's what inspired Paul Desmond to write Take 5. Because As Long as You're Living was in 5. And
There was another album that Max did that was using a lot of odd meters. Did that come before Dave Brubeck's Time Out? I should know this, but I don't. I'm wondering.
I have to know what the name of the album and when.
I can't remember it, but
Yeah.
if one of the viewers knows, please let us know that there's a very famous album that Max Roach did that was exploring odd meters.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't know which one came first chronologically, but
Well, I know from working with Max, he was very adventuresome. He wanted to do something that's fresh and new. So the fact that odd meters, playing in odd meters, was challenging, and it was sort of pushing the music, the concept, forward. Rather than continuing to play from the classics, like Dixieland. Fortunately, we are striving to push forward, conceptually. We've striving to grow and take chances, rather than keep repeating what's traditional, which I have a lot of respect for, but as time moves on, we have to move on with it,
I believe, remembering now, again, the conversation was 20 years ago, but we were talking about jazz and hip hop, and I think what we were discussing, and correct me if I'm wrong, and if you even recall the conversation, it's so long ago, but we were talking about hip hop and artists that were freestyling, because basically maybe they're doing something melodic, but a lot of times it's very rhythmic and they're doing things off the cuff. And some artists they'll write their verses down and have it just so, but other artists are just using their vocabulary and their rhythmic vocabulary as well to basically spontaneously compose poems,
Yes,
if you will.
That's wonderful. I respect that. The creative process, being spontaneous like that, it's where the future lies.
One of the common denominators, I guess, from both whether you're doing instrumental jazz or freestyling with hip hop is, you have to have a strong sense of rhythm and time to do that well, and that always seems to be like one of the common denominators in music. Like, as we both know, you can play all the right notes, but with poor time, and it's going to sound bad. And you can play all the wrong notes with good time, and you can make it sound great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. But I want this music to be here, for our grandchildren and our great grandchildren. I want this music to be here for as long as we are active. I mean, I'm not talking about personally. I'm talking about humankind. So it's just special. I mean, it's from the heart, it's from the spirit. And it's historically representative of a certain period and I'm hearing my telephone in the distance back there.
It fits the conversation, so you know.
Anyway, it distracted me. Yeah, okay. I think that we should make every effort to let our feelings and our knowledge know, so that, as I said before, our great-grandchildren would be able to be benefit from what we're doing, because it's history. It's our history. You know, what we're doing is reflective of ages of life. You know, and that life has been, you know, it's here and it's there and it's bad and it's good. You know, it's all of those things. You know, and also the religious aspect. You know, the blues. You know, all those things are important in terms of the historical record. And our music is an example of that, a musical example of historical representative in terms of the emotional message that we try. We're not just pushing down valves or pushing down keys or making a slide going up and down. You know, there's sounds there, and those sounds are coming from our heart. You know, and they're coming from our early experiences. You know, I remember hearing sounds from church that I still remember. And it's not a conscious effort to play those sounds from my childhood, but they're here. You know, and they're here. So it comes out, because I tried not to be to consciously affect the music. You know, I don't want to play what I practiced. You know, I don't want to play the licks that I memorized from Charlie Parker and Clifford Brown and Sonny Rollins, and you know, I learned from them, but I have to let that go and get away from that and express my own desire. It comes from the moment, not from some pre-arranged situation. I believe very strongly that the creation is the best we can do if it's instant. If it's not influenced by anything else. It's just from the moment. You got other people you're performing with, perhaps. You have an audience out there that you're relating to, perhaps. Or hopefully they're also relating to you. But those are the things, the mechanisms that make this music special.
I'd say, you know, you're mentioning having this music live on and passing things on. And you certainly did that with all of the classes that you taught at Cornish. You taught free ensemble, you taught the rhythm class, you taught many of the other ensembles, you know, bebop ensembles and many different things, and lots of different concepts. What I've thought about this a lot over the years. You know, you've worked with a lot of the innovators of this art form, of this music, Max Roach, Freddie Hubbard, Sun Ra, Philly Joe Jones, Johnny Griffin, all these characters. And when you would explain something, you know, remembering back, you would offer the concept, but you wouldn't give a lot of direction. And I'm thinking about it now. It's because you don't want. And please, and this is just my.
Go ahead.
You don't want to influence someone's creativity. You're showing them what to do, but you're not telling them how to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that was a conscious thing, because you're generally soft-spoken and not really,
Right.
But with education, remembering back to classes, if we were talking about improvising or something of that nature, it would never be, oh, you need to do it this way. It's like, oh, here's a concept, and that would just, you would offer the concept, and then it would just kind of stop with that. Is that the reason you were doing that?
Yes. You know, it's the ideas are there. I mean, you know, you really don't have to study. I mean, just open your ears up and listen, and join what you hear. You know, compliment what you hear, and make that a part of the music, because it is.
All right. I would like to talk to you, if you don't mind, a little bit about rhythm class, because I remember when I first got to Cornish, you were teaching rhythm class. And
Yes.
one thing that I thought was interesting at the time, and now that I'm older and wiser, I understand why you did it, but you made everyone in the class, despite what their instrument was, play drums.
Yeah.
What was your motive for doing that?
Oh, internalizing time. Okay. I think that was my motive. You know, when you internalize time, you can just ride it. You don't have to study it. You don't have to keep time like some players do. You know.
You would have each of us, we had to be able to play 2 and 4 on the hi-hat,
Yeah.
quarter notes on the ride cymbal. We started with that. And just
Yeah.
getting that, with some folks being able to coordinate that, was a challenge. And then once we could do that, then you had us play the basic, you know, da, 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 da on the
Yeah.
ride cymbal
Yeah.
and 2 and 4 on the hi-hat.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was, what? Why? But I understand now why you were doing that. But in terms of developing getting someone to cultivate their sense of time, beyond doing that, are there other things that you think are beneficial for people that are trying to develop a stronger sense of time?
Oh, practice. You know, just use the environment to practice. You know, you can use your body. You can use whatever's available. I mean, for rhythm, that is, practice different rhythms, and conceptualize them. How would they look if they're written down? You know, what would they look like on paper? And just for exercise, write some out. You know, imagine a rhythm and write it down. You know, you can do that. You know, and that in itself gives you a sense of time, which is steady. You know, you can rely on it, but you want to get your body and your mind so it doesn't have to count. It doesn't have to keep track of time. You know, you can feel it, internalize it. You know, and the way to practice doing that is to practice. You know. Anyway.
No, like I said, I mean, I understand now. I just want to make sure people watching understand too, so they get the benefit of your wisdom while you're still here with us.
Yes,
So,
yes.
which I hope now that you've had 2 COVID shots, that will be much longer into the future. I'd like to also jump around here and talk about free ensemble, because I have
Yes.
really great memories of you teaching the free ensemble. And as we talked about in one of our prior interviews, you know, the artists that developed and innovated that music, many of them were very good musicians already, had strong ears, sense of harmony, sense of time. And you can find many musicians nowadays that will use free music or the idea of free music as a reason to not learn those things and have strong groundings in those elements, and therefore it kind of gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
But for you, with playing like in Sun Ra's Orchestra, all these other wonderful artists,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on how to develop playing well in a free jazz context for people that want to learn how to develop that skill? What advice would you offer to them?
Okay. Two things that I can think of right now. The first one is listen. Listen to your environment. Listen to, if you're playing with someone, is there other people involved? But listen to them. Listen to the sounds that they're creating as a whole, not as an individual. You know, listen to the complete sound. And from your knowledge, that you have gained from your individual practice and your development of your ear, and you can hear scales, you can hear intervals, you can hear chord centers, tonal centers, I should say. So if you listen, although it's random, it's coming from different places, but if you listen, you can identify the tonal center. And you can join that tonal center. If you don't, it's sort of tell your ego to stay out of it. Control your ego so you don't become too dominant. Your ideas and your position. You don't want to be too dominant. You want to go with the prevailing sound, and there also you want to develop a different way to express melodic ideas. Melodic ideas don't necessarily all have to be beautiful, but for the sake of variety, you don't want to stay in any of those areas. But that's you want to keep the sounds interesting so that the listener doesn't get bored or scared away, and so you want to keep all those things present, and not be afraid to go with your impulse. If you hear something, go with it. Don't question it. Don't evaluate. That's the term. Don't evaluate what you're playing. That's the worst thing you could do, because it's going to stifle you. If you start thinking about, is this okay? Well, yeah, it's not okay. If you don't mess with it, it's okay. Anyway.
Yes. All right. I'm curious, with that style of music, with free jazz, that one spectrum of jazz, who are some of your favorite artists, and what are some of your favorite albums, or if there were any, as influences for that style?
So many. I alluded to them, artist-wise, of course, Clifford Brown, Thelonious Monk, of course, Max Roach, and it goes on and on. Some of the lesser-known artists, I'm thinking the pianist, his name escapes me right now, but the gorgeous piano player. And of course, it's Bud Powell, speaking of the piano. Anyway, favorite artists. Let me think of some of the younger ones.
Well, I'm thinking more towards, like, if we talk about free music, Ornette Coleman is one of the pioneers of that music. So when that started becoming more and more popular and played and known as an idiom, who were some of those artists? Did you check out any of those artists, and anyone that you kind of gravitated towards, or?
Yeah. I'm thinking about the Chicago. I'm thinking about the AACM artists. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nashira.
Muhal, Richard Abrams, and most of the people who came out of Chicago were inclusive of. Their works were inclusive of the traditional and the fresh, new sounds. Everyone was trying to. I'm going to say something, but it's true, but it's not very well known. But this whole movement, the freestyle, came about as a result of the attention that the industry was given to the West Coast musicians after World War II, because we were shut out. I mean, when I say we, I'm talking about the East Coast and that whole bebop style, post-bop, whatever that means. So in an effort to move away and try and create something that was not easily duplicated or copied, I'm just saying we, to include the Chicago style and others, East Coast musicians, tried to create something that wasn't easily copied. And ultimately, the media named it free. You know, we were just trying to get away from the East Coast style, which was on all the radio shows, on all the jazz shows. They were just playing West Coast music. You know, because the record companies were supplying records with West Coast musicians, artists, I should say. And so we were just kind of disappointed. That's a kind of a getting revenge type. Okay.
All right. I wanted to ask you, I was thinking about this as well. When you compose, everyone's got a different way of composing, but for you, with working with so many different, vastly different artists over your career, do you have a particular process for composing your own songs? And I'm not talking about improvising, spontaneous composition. I mean, they're kind of one and the same, but how do you view composition and how do you go about composing through your perspectives?
Oh,
Very small subject here.
yeah. It started when I was young and inexperienced. You know, I just was inspired. I wanted to do this. You know, I was working with Sun Ra, and I wanted to contribute something to, you know, so I just wrote something that I really haven't studied how to do it. I just did it, you know, imagine how it would sound and then write it down on paper. And I have to go back to when high school. My first composition, I wrote a high school for an orchestra, a piece for an orchestra. I'd never written anything else before. And my high school band director, bless him, rehearsed it. You know, of course it was awful. But that got me, you know, got my juices flowing, you know. And pretty much after that, I used the inspiration of whatever group that I was working with to get me going, to write something for that particular group, you know. So I haven't really done any kind of composing just for the sake of composing. I have to have something tangible so that I can hear what, you know, I'm writing for you. I'm not just writing, you know. So I've got you in mind, or whatever, you know, whoever. I got that entity in mind when I'm composing.
I'm curious then, going back to all these different bands, and there's a lot of questions I want to ask here, but talking about Duke Ellington, we mentioned before that you were with Duke's band, and you had a couple situations that weren't pleasant with that band, but just working with so many different wonderful musicians, even though they were playing from a different era. Anything, not compositionally, but anything that you learned from that experience to move you forward positively for your playing?
I, out of the shock and shame of hearing Duke tell me, Julian, what do you want? You know, after all, you're just a trombone player.
For people that don't have context, in one of the interviews before, you mentioned that he owed you money from a recording session or for a recording session, and you asked about getting paid for it. And then he said, what do you expect or what do you want from me? You're just a trombone player.
So. We were we get preparing to do a recording. And I was asking him about, which we hadn't talked about. No one had mentioned it. Of course, I'm, thinking about my responsibilities. I mean, if I'm going to be paid, of course, there's no guarantee that I'm going to get paid. So I felt obliged to ask Duke, if I was going to get paid. And his response was, "You're just a trombone player. What do you what do you want?"
I get that, and that's clearly not an ideal situation. But what I'm asking is, being around a mind like Duke Ellington, despite his business practices, is there anything that you learned from being in his sphere of influence musically, per se?
Oh yeah, even before I joined his band, I have had the greatest admiration, respect, and awe of Duke Ellington and what he has accomplished. I mean, the direction in music that he chose. It's beyond, the ordinary.
Well, you hear of someone like Dizzy Gillespie, and I haven't talked about Dizzy with you, so I don't know if you had any relationship with him or.
Yes.
But when you hear about Dizzy, anyone that was around him would always say he was always talking music and teaching and giving of information and techniques and how to do things.
Yeah.
Was Duke Ellington a person like that?
No.
So it was just if you wanted to learn something, you basically just got what you could get from recordings. If you had a question about something, was he approachable in that manner or not really?
Yeah, you adapt. I mean, I'm in the middle of this orchestra, and I'm hearing all these wonderful musicians, and they have their own collective style, So it was impossible for me not to gain that style and emulate that particular style, although it led to my sort of emotional discomfort, because I was one of the youngest members of the orchestra, but I adopted a persona of these older guys. I was walking around with the jacket and tie, and I had my little bottle of scotch that I'd taken to the hotel room. That's what they did, And I realized that I was trying to play in that style, the older style, and I also recognized that I was not happy doing that. Here I am. I'm right. Charlie Parker's my hero. I mean, as much as I love and respect Duke Ellington, I wasn't happy there. Yeah.
It's like some folks that really love Dixieland music. I mean, that's wonderful, but it might not be for someone who doesn't like that style. Having to play that could be not a lot of fun. And I think a lot of musicians nowadays, it seems like a lot of musicians are taught, well, you need to learn to play any style of music so that you can take anything that comes your way.
Yes.
To what end, though? I mean, if you're not happy playing a certain thing and you're just doing something for money, you might as well do something else for money that at least makes you happy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm just like,
Well. I didn't. It did not diminish my love for Duke Ellington. It just let me know that I needed to go out on my own, and fate actually came to my rescue. The orchestra was getting ready to do a tour of Europe, and as is my habit, I wait till the last minute to pack, and I packed the night before. I was supposed to get on the plane. Couldn't find my passport. Couldn't find it. It was nowhere to be seen. They weren't going to let me on that airplane without a passport. So I was left. I was left. They left me to my benefit.
What happened? We're waiting for the answer here.
Yeah. it was to my benefit because I organized a group of my own and was rehearsing, getting ready to present that group when I got the call from Garnett Brown, the trombone player, who was working with Herbie Hancock at the time, asking me to substitute for him with Herbie's band while he finished a writing assignment, which I agreed to do. But Garnett never came back. He never came back.
This
all
actually.
These things, let me just say
Yeah,
this.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Go
all
ahead.
these things happened to me beyond my control, out of my control. I mean, I didn't actually seek the job with Herbie Hancock. It fell into my possession. You know? And I'm happy. You know, very happy.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what I wanted to ask about next is talking about Duke Ellington's personality and going from Dizzy Gillespie being very open and giving of information. What was it like being around Herbie's sphere of influence? Were there a lot of discussions? Because you mentioned before that you were in a band with a lot of like-minded musicians thinking the same way.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that there was a lot of discussions about music and just possibilities and things. But
Yes.
Herbie himself, as a person and a teacher and a musician and instructor, was he very forthcoming with information and talking about music, or not really?
Oh, yes, he was forthcoming, but I mean, we were like a family, you know. So we all shared the same emotions, the same, ideas. You know, we sometimes got off the stage looking at each other in amazement that we created that music that we did that just happened. You know, I can recall one engagement in Chicago. It was like a restaurant. It was a steakhouse. London House was the name of it, and there was business people who would come and eat, have a meal there, and the place was pretty well filled up with people eating, and the music that we were playing stopped them from eating. They had their forks up to their mouth, but they were amazed, or just maybe just distracted, because the music, they'd never heard anything like that before. Yeah. And the club owner offered to put us up in one of his other venues. There's a theater that he, rather than have us in the restaurant, because the patrons were not eating. Yeah. And I think it was like a 3-week engagement. But we stayed for the whole 3 weeks and won over the few customers who kept coming back, and the workers, the waitresses and the bartenders learned to like the music. They were applauding us because they'd never heard that kind of music before.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of times when you think of Herbie Hancock, particularly at that point in his career, after working with Miles Davis and all these other great artists, I wouldn't think that he'd be playing in a steakhouse,
Yeah.
So I mean that's refreshing as a musician to hear that there's I guess hope ? I don't know.
Well, yeah, you have to sort of be prepared for those kinds of situations. I can remember one instance, another situation, and this was on the West Coast, where we were booked. The band was booked into this another, I think it was a restaurant, but it was a jazz club, and we set up and played our first set, and the owner of the club came to the band and asked Herbie if we would not play anymore. He said, she offered to pay us for, but first thing she asked, when we first started setting up, they asked, well, which one's the singer? They wouldn't know.
And you said, I am.
Anyway, that should have been a hint as to how the night was going to go. And so we didn't play the next set, but we got paid anyway. But that music was so strong. It was not something to be just, it wasn't like relaxing music, It stirred your emotions.
So out of that situation with being operating as like a family and really getting to know and work well as a unit with that band, what were I'm assuming there were some takeaways that helped you become who you are today. So what do you think some of the takeaways were for you from working with that group?
Oh, it was a source of inspiration. That feeling and that energy stayed with me after the group broke up. One of the resulting incidents that came after that group was my recording of the album Love, Love. Patrick Gleason was the synthesis on that album, who was also working with Herbie Hancock group. And so Pat and I decided to do an album of music where I composed the music, arranged it, and Pat added his synthesizer to the arrangement. And it really came out very well. I mean, to this day, people still asking me about that particular album.
Sorry, I know we're getting short on time here. Are there questions coming in? Sorry, sorry, we have questions. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm kind of like just bombarding Julian here. So what do we have? What questions do we have?
A question was, first I would love to hear more about stories of making Keep Swinging. The album is a treasure.
Keep Swinging. Oh.
Yeah.
So can you tell stories about the making of the album Keep
wow.
Swinging?
Yes. Keep Swinging. An album, my very first recording when I arrived in New York. And, well, this is actually a year after I arrived, but in 1960, Johnny Griffin, who's also a Chicagoan saxophone player, I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Never heard of him. No.
Arranged for me to meet the vice president of Riverside Records, who gave me a job in the shipping department so I can earn some money, so I can pay some rent, which I used to rent a room. That's the same room that,
Freddie.
yeah, right. Anyway, Orrin Keep News was the name of the vice president of Riverside Record, and he put together a recording. I guess it was on Johnny Griffin's recommendation. He put together a recording session for me, featuring me as a newcomer, and he put together the band. Jimmy Heath, saxophonist, had just been released from jail. He had spent some time there on a drug thing. And my drummer on this session was Elvin Jones. My piano player on this session, I'm having a senior moment here. I'll come back to that. But the bass player also, whose name is slipping my mind here, but I'll get to it. Tommy Flanagan was the pianist, and the bass player was Sam Jones.
Yeah.
How can that not be amazing?
That should answer the question right there. So other questions?
Yeah. Can you talk about building
Oh,
So
boy.
the question is, can you talk about Billie Holiday as a musician and any other vocalist that you've enjoyed?
Billie Holiday is, oh, boy. I think Billie Holiday was my first love. I had one experience listening to Billie Holiday. She came to Chicago, was performing in the Persian Ballroom. The ballroom is part of a hotel, the Persian Hotel in Chicago. And in that ballroom, they had set it up for performances. You won't believe this, but the stage band was Sun Ra. Okay, so I'm in the band, and Billie Holiday comes to do a performance, and to my joy, she had lost the trombone part. So I had an opportunity to go sit in the audience and listen to her. And they darkened the room, the ballroom, and put a pinpoint spotlight on Billie Holiday's face. I fell in love. I mean, I really, really, really fell in love, and have been in love with her since. So need I say more?
Other questions? Nashira is saying Abby Lincoln.
Abby Lincoln, another lover. I was going to say something, but I'm not going to say that.
Other questions?
When you joined the Mike Allen trio for a few dates in 2003, this was an incredible, moving, and memorable experience for everyone. What were your experiences?
Oh, boy.
So the question is, when you joined the Mike Allen trio in 2003 for several performances, what were some of your favorite experiences of that? I think I got that right.
enjoyed that. But it was up in Vancouver, Canada. And Mike brought me up to play, and I've always been fond of Vancouver. The musicians that operate and perform there are very, very wonderful. And Mike is one. I sort of disappointed in Mike. I won't go into the details, but it was something that happened with the money, and Mike was unhappy. You know, that's as far as I'm going to go with it. But I enjoyed playing with him. I think he's an excellent creative person, and I would love to, to repeat that opportunity. Yes. Oh yes. Oh, the drummer.
Julian McDonough.
Julian McDonough. Yes. Yeah, I like Julian, of course.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Other questions?
Someone's favorite album that you were on is Max Roach album, It's Time.
Oh yes.
Can you discuss the album, Max Roach album, It's Time?
It's time. Yeah. Well, all of my experiences with Max Roach, and especially the recording experiences are special. It's Time was definitely one of those that I believe Abby Lincoln and there's a chorus on that particular album, which it enhanced the whole impact of that music. Yes, it's still to this day one of my favorite albums. Speaking of Max Roach and the album, I just I found on YouTube an album that Max Roach recorded live in Europe with the Turntine Brothers and myself and Bobby Boswell playing bass. and it was one of those Max Roach tempos, you know, like, you know, when
Causes carpal tunnel. Yeah, I know what you
Yes.
mean.
yes, and the trombone is not designed to to play in those tempos, but I survived, you know, and just the fact that I've survived, kudos.
Well, that's actually a good stopping point because it is time. So we're at the end of our segment here. Thank you so much for everyone joining us today. Thank you so much, Julian, for joining us. As per all these videos, if you'd like to make a donation to support what we're doing, feel free to do that either via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check. All of the donations today for this interview and for our next broadcast, normally they go to support our organization, but since we have Julian here today and he's not been able to work or teach, all the donations are going to go to Julian. So if you'd like to make a donation, any of those links that you see there above, feel free to do that, and all of them will go to support Julian during this time when we're not able to work. So please, thank you so much for thinking about that. And if you enjoy the work we're doing, spread the word. And we're going to be back here in an hour to do a performance with the full band with Julian and Stefan and Greg. And thank you so much, and hope to see you again soon.
And thanks, Kareem.
Of course, my pleasure. My pleasure.